it is a similar way to saying nobody can say Jesus Christ is Lord except by the Spirit. Of if we're saying this truthfully, if we're singing this song truthfully, then we have swapped sides. We are pledging our allegiance to the Lamb. We are committing ourselves to following his ways and not the ways of the dragon and the beasts. In our singing, we are witnessing to something. We are praising God. We are foretelling who he is. We're reminding ourselves who God is as well.
Welcome to this week's Calling a City to Life, a podcast by Queen's Park Baptist Church in Glasgow. The question is it sunny in Glasgow? Because it's sunny in Ayrshire this morning. Gentlemen, you're in Glasgow just now.
It's beautiful in Glasgow today.
I felt you're saying that as a default, like it's just always beautiful in Glasgow.
No, that's
effort to look out the window.
It's always sunny in the south side, but it was a lovely cold walk in the sunshine to church. Well, I think Rob
McElhenney's got that reserved as a statement for Philadelphia, but there we go. A new TV show coming to the south side of Glasgow anytime soon. Iain, is the sun shining on the righteous this morning?
I have no idea, but it's sunny where I am. But it's so sunny that I've got all my blinds down and everything's kind of all blocked out, so I can't see the sun at all. This is the disadvantage of where I position my study, which is that if it's sunny, I have to close everything down and I can't see anything.
So it could actually be the night rather than the morning.
It's
what you're saying.
Yeah, it always has that kind of feel in my office. The sunnier it is, the darker I have to be in the office.
Cool. Well, what we're going to do first, we're going to do Confessions Corner first because I have a confession to make. So I got a row from our show note guru, Laura, who said that she had to write show notes 2 weeks ago that said that I was going to tell a story last week about butter, and then I didn't tell it, so she felt like she had shortchanged the listenership and insisted that we recorded the whole show again. I said I'd just do a catch-up this week instead. So very quickly, my story about butter, and this is a real crossover moment, is some people will be aware that I do another podcast, nothing to do with this subject, but there is a well-known food critic based in Dublin who listens to that other podcast. And he emailed me to say, I know you don't drink, but here is some butter that's made by some folk that make gin. Stick with this story, guys, it gets better. That make gin based in Scotland, up in Aberdeen. So he sent me the link and he emailed it back and says, oh, that's very interesting. I'm not going to use it the normal podcast that you listen to me on. I'll use it in a different one because I was talking about crisp sandwiches and I know you're a food critic, so this will really offend you, but it'll allow me to talk about the best recommended butter to go on the crisp sandwich. To which he replied, oh, is the podcast you do about Scotland, seeing as you're Scottish? Because my granny's Scottish, and if it was a podcast about Scotland, I'd have a listen. To which I'd reply, no, it's a bit more niche than that. It's a podcast I produce and assist with for the church that I go to. To which he said, oh, I'm a really, really lapsed Anglican, but I like listening to stuff about the Bible. What's the podcast called? So we sent in the details and he is now, I don't know if he's now a loyal listener, but he did check in and listen. So that just shows you podcasting can be a form of reaching out to people who don't normally listen to things about the Bible. So it was a real crossover moment between wristwatch podcasting and church podcasting. But there you go. So there you go, Laura. That was a story. I don't know if it was worth waiting for.
I don't know, but I'm just now kind of like thinking about what flavour of crisps did you put in your sandwich? Because it's got to be cheese and onion. Cheese and onion are the crisps to put in a sandwich.
Well, Nick from church, who I think was referred to by Des from Alpha from the platform as Pina Colada Nick, but I might have made that up. It did message me to say he was just catching up on the podcast and he got to the crisp one and his favourite crisp sandwich, I think, was something to do with Bovril. I think there needed to be Bovril involved. So, yeah, there you go. But anyway, salt and vinegar for me. Salt and vinegar. Always salt and vinegar. Anyway, that's my confessions corner. Iain, funny thing happened to you at church on Sunday. You literally seemed to hear the voice of God.
Well, yeah. There were a number of people shout at me from random places, what you don't know, Richard, is that was only the first of three. And in fact,
it was three witnesses.
And so in tune with the angels of Revelation that I guess we get to speak about this morning. Yes, I had three. I had three voices from on high on Sunday morning. That kind of randomly came out of the ether. I mean, they all were actually human beings who were present in the building. But yeah, I kind of started a little bit of a flow there. Random people shouting at me from random places that I couldn't quite identify.
It was particularly funny because the last one we saw was somebody shouting at you, to which your response was to look directly up in the air, which was what made us think that you thought you were just hearing something direct. It was just Elaine, which is absolutely fine. You know, Elaine.
Also an angel.
To hear from, also amazing, but there we go. Meanwhile, elsewhere, before we get on with the topic, Brodie, have you finished writing your rock opera for Revelation as exclusively revealed?
No,
Sunday?
But I think, what was the guy O'Brien that used to do the Crystal Maze and did the Rocky
Richard
Horror?
O'Brien.
Yeah, I think he's our man for this project.
Yes, there we go. Right, let's move it on a bit. Brodie, you preached this Sunday from Revelation 14 and the start of 15. Why don't you give us a summary of where you took us?
So my starting point was that this really flows on from where we were the week before in chapter 12 and 13, that it's still about a battle, but seen from a different perspective. And it splits into 4 scenes. Verses 1 to 5 is the Lamb and his army. 6 to 13 was the bit that we jumped over, where we have the 3 angels. There's then this scene of 2 harvests in 14 to 20, and then it actually spills into chapter 15, the first 4 verses, which I think is us back where we were at the start of 14, having a different view of the Lamb and his followers in worship. And really, in many respects, the message can be summarized in a couple of phrases of the Lamb does no violence and his army battle in worship. And worship as most definitely singing, hence the rock opera for Revelation, because the narrative throughout the book of Revelation is interspersed with these songs of worship. But worship also as foretelling God's word and prayer, and tied in a little as well with some of what Iain said the week before, because one of the themes that comes out of this, and one of the big themes of Revelation again, is about truthfulness. So who truly is God that we worship? How do we worship in truth? But what's the truth about us? Because that's one of the things I think Revelation is doing for these people in the 7 churches, is revealing who they really are, and that we can take confidence and encouragement from that, but it's something we need to step into.
I've been thinking the more that we get into Revelation, how it's like, in some ways, like the ultimate English essay, because the use of imagery and contrast is extraordinary. And I think the thing that I was really feeling now that we're into these sort of 13, 14, 15, the worship and war thing coming up against each other, is that the contrast of it is becoming more and more striking. I don't know if that's just because of the way that we're immersed in it at the moment for me, but that's what I was starting to see and feel when you were speaking on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, would John get into trouble from his teacher for kind of like mixing his metaphors? Most definitely. But I think one of the things, certainly as I read Revelation and as other people read Revelation, is that it is incredibly political, and it is incredibly anti-militaristic in its a message. Political with a small p, of how do we live together under God's rule. And it's speaking to these early Christians and the church throughout time about what is real power, what is power that actually changes, what is power that brings forth life. And it's not this violent, domineering power, either at the end of the sword or mean, we can use words violently, can't we? We can even kind of like use our body language, to intimidate people, and kingdom power, Jesus power, Lamb power is completely different from that. It's a different kind of strength. So I think it really that contrast is I think you're right to see that, Jackie. And I think the early church, considering there's Roman soldiers and goodness knows what walking around their streets, the contrast I think would have been even more stark for them.
Iain, Brodie talked about the fact that the worship scene was seen from lots of different vantage points, like it was a rewrite of the same thing happening in sort of multiple different ways. What was the need for the repeat of to keep talking about that scene?
Gosh, I think for anybody listening, you need to know that we have no announcement beforehand of what these questions will be. So
sorry.
So that has kind of come out of that. I never really expected it, Jack. So,
well, while Iain's thinking about that, I'll have a wee stab. And yeah, the only question that we know that we're going to be asked is for the 60-second summary, and we don't even practice that. But I think you have, so Paul talks about us being seated in heavenly places. And I think one of the things that these multiple images of the saints at worship is speaking to is that we're in two places at once, kind of thing. We are here in the messiness of everyday life, but we're also seated with Christ in heavenly places. And we are participating in... there's a kind of like a dual participation. We're participating in what's happening in heaven, and heaven is participating in what's happening on earth. That's exciting.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good response.
Iain, are you ready?
I don't know what you're going to ask.
No. Well, brace yourself.
Ready for anything.
Well, either way, can you just push into this anti-militaristic thing? Because it's a phrase, certainly a Brodie you've used, Iain, you may have used, but certainly Brodie you used last week. Push into just where you're getting that from in Revelation. Why you say that Revelation is anti-militaristic? Because every representation of Revelation is guns and bombs and soldiers and swords and all the rest of it, depending on what context you're reading in it. So push into that a bit further, because obviously it's incredibly relevant right now, and people are, drawing all sorts of parallels to stuff going on in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think continually, and this gets back to Jackie's point about circling round different images and pictures. I think we're continually being drawn to the nature of who Jesus is and how Jesus exercises the purposes and will of God. And he does that by being a lamb. I mean, the lamb is the center of the focus of heaven. And the lamb conquers by a life laid down. And that image, I think, is the image that we're called back to again and again as we circle around these different images of Revelation. And probably this passage, I would have just a little bit of a different viewpoint to Brodie on how this passage is actually set up. I think it's 5 scenes, not 4 scenes. And it's what's controversially, but I think it's actually what's called a chiasm. I'm sure I pronounced that word wrong, as I always do, but basically it's a parallelism where you have the beginning and the end sort of bookmark the middle. So you have at the beginning, you have worship, you have worship at the end in chapter 15, sort of 1 to 4, whatever. And then you have 3 angels in the kind of next section. And then before the end, you have another 3 angels. And then stuck right in the middle of that is verse 14. So 14, I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was the one like a son of man, with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And so I think, again, even here in this text, we're being pointed back to this figure, whether it's the Son of Man or the Lamb, whose life and whose activity is the thing that shifts history. And I think for human beings, we shift history by the exercise of power. So we talk about warfare as being like the final solution, but it's not really a final solution because conflict actually never resolves anything. You always have to have a solution beyond that. So we're being pointed here to a different way in which authority and power is exercised in the kingdom of God. And that contrasts with all the other figures, such as the beasts and the dragon and Babylon that we'll be coming to next week, which are really embodiments of coercive, violent, and destructive power. So there's this contrast going on all the time about how do you wage not just war, but how do you exercise authority and how do you implement power in human affairs? And of course, we always have to remember that this is being heard by a bunch of Christians who, I mean, not very many Christians, just a bunch of people kind of holed up in a house somewhere who are facing the might of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire's whole mentality is that you wage peace through war, that actually you beat people into submission and peace by the exercise of force. So this contrast is being painted all the time between, is it the Lamb or is it Rome? Is it the beasts or is it the laid down life of Christ?
Brodie, contextualise the difference between us hearing this versus the 7 churches to which it was written hearing this. You know, those churches, as Iain's touched on, had no power. We do have some power. We have the vote, you know, we can act, we have resources. Contrast just the difference of the way we're hearing this versus those it was originally intended for.
I think the big difference is that we are post-Constantine.
Right.
So the church at this point is this marginal group. Rome's still trying to work out who they are. Are these Jews? Are they not Jews? What are they? They're trouble. And the church is, I think, to a certain extent, quite sure about who it is. The challenge is the compromise. But we've got nearly 2,000 years of history, 1,800 of that where the church has had real political worldly power. And therefore this message of this anti-militaristic message tends to get lost somewhere in realpolitik and what if type questions of, well, does that mean that, you know, we shouldn't have attacked Nazi Germany, or we shouldn't do this, or we shouldn't do the next thing? And most definitely the church shouldn't. That's for states to do. And there are a variety of Christian standpoints with regards to our relationship to the state. It is complicated, but the power of the gospel, the power of the kingdom that we are called to, I think not just from the testimony of Revelation, but throughout the New Testament, indeed drawing on many of the Old Testament prophets as well, and the testimony of the early church up until 3rd, 4th century, when you start to get people like Augustine who argue otherwise, the early Christians wouldn't serve in the army, wouldn't take on positions that involved coercive power, etc. So it has become more complicated as our position within society in relationship to real political power has changed.
You talked some about worship being our weapon, and this is not a topic that we've not covered before. We've talked about this a number of times in the past. A quick question, just of something I'm interested in verse 3. No one could learn this song except the 144,000. Can you explain a little bit more than that? I mean, I have my own thoughts about what that means, in that only those ones were able to sing the song. But can you explain a little bit more about it?
Well, we get to learn what the song is in chapter 15. And I think it is a similar way to saying, hey, nobody can say Jesus Christ is Lord except by the Spirit. Mm-hmm. Of if we're saying this truthfully, if we're singing this song truthfully, then we have swapped sides, as it were. We are pledging our allegiance to the Lamb. We are committing ourselves to following his ways and not the ways of the dragon and the beasts. So we are witnessing to something. I think that's the key kind of like, or one of the key things. In our singing, we are witnessing to something. We are praising God. We are foretelling who he is. We're reminding ourselves who God is as well. So that would be my reading of that. Whether that's the right answer or not, I don't know, but we get to know what the song is, and I think it's got something to do with who we've decided to follow.
This kind of does touch on something you said right at the beginning about the chapters and verses, not being part of the Bible, being added. Because if you just read chapter 14 and it says you don't know the song, you're 140, and you stop there, then you're like, oh, here's a special clique. Am I part of them? And then you start asking the wrong questions. Whereas if you just read it like you would read a letter or a book, the whole thing, you get to 50. Oh, right, okay, I know the song. That means I'm one of this. Just is this one of the books of the Bible that having chapters and verses and chapter headings causes the most difficulty in, because it stops folk reading it as a narrative?
I think certainly chapter headings are, yeah, they're not part of the inspired word of God. I mean, they can be helpful in some respects. I think it was one of the things when we did, large number of people in the church did a thing, I've lost track of time, called Immerse, where we read through the New Testament in a version of the Bible that didn't have chapter headings and verses. And part of what Immerse was looking to help people do was engage with the broad sweep of what's the big story here, what are the big issues that are being raised, because very often Bible reading material can just be kind of like a short verse or a bit that's kind of like ripped out of its context, ripped out of the bigger narrative. So I think having that bigger narrative in which we can then zoom in on things is helpful. I don't know whether Revelation is particularly challenged because we've got chapter numbers and verses. They're a good thing. They help us find our place and know where we all are in the text. But sometimes it's good to read and ignore them.
I think as the guy who was divvying up some of these passages to preach, I've probably got a bit of an opinion on this. And yeah, I think in Revelation, it does cause you some issues and problems because there are structures inherent in the text that the chapter headings kind of cut right across. And this is actually a great example of it, because there is a very common structure. If you are a community of people who don't use chapters, then you use other kind of structures to structure your writing. And as I kind of argued a few moments ago, I think there's a real kind of parallelism in this. And so you actually miss two of the main points of this particular section if you stop at the end of chapter 14. So actually reading into chapter 15 gives you a structure. And that structure then points to not to necessarily just to the end, but also to the middle of the section, which I would argue is kind of trying to highlight the main point that Christ, the Son of God, Son of Man, is exalted in the midst of all the trials of earth as we worship and witness his triumph, his exercise. So if you're to end, at the end of chapter 14, you're kind of stuck in all of this blood flowing out of the winepress, riding high as horses. I kind of thinking, well, is this where everything ends? But that's not the point. The point is that it doesn't end here. It ends with great and marvelous are your deeds. So yeah, I think we can really get tripped up by some of these chapter headings, and they kind of obscure the real structure that is there. And maybe Revelation is particularly difficult for that reason. It's difficult enough without people putting the chapter headings in the wrong place.
Indeed. Well, apparently Revelation is just playful. Iain, didn't you know? Were you not there on Sunday? I mean...
Yeah, but you've got to know the game, Jackie. If somebody's put the lines in the wrong place, it's hard to play the game.
Hard to do.
Yeah, it's like one of the. Do you remember when you were in school and you'd be in the gym hall and there was just the lines for every sport on the gym, and you're like, I don't know whether I'm in or out.
Yeah.
Yes, it's like watching rugby being played in a football stadium where they've just had to burn out the markings so you can see two lines. So maybe that's a good illustration of Revelation. Is there's about 15 different sports. It goes back to the everything, everywhere, all at once. Now, Brodie, we need to have a wee word. A challenge as to whether you've ruined the greatest Christmas movie ever known, It's a Wonderful Life, because everybody knows that every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. So, Brodie, have you ruined Christmas? Talk to us about the angels. It was an area that we didn't touch on Sunday.
Yeah. Have I ruined Christmas? It's only recently that I've discovered the film. It's a Wonderful Life. So I kind of get the cultural reference there. So, yeah, where do you want to go with the angels?
So tell us first of all why angels don't have, not why, but give us the background. The angels don't have wings, first of all, and then touch on where they're involved in this passage.
Well, I'll reverse that round. So, Richard and dear listeners, show me the scripture that says the angel have wings, because there isn't
Absolutely.
one. It's the seraphim and cherubim, and Hazel, who joined us in kind of like during lockdown, is super faithful at kind of like sending emails of encouragement. So she was very quick off the mark from the blog and said, Brodie, angels don't have wings. I'm like, thank you, Hazel. You're right.
So if I can jump in, I did some research on this. So
here we go. Drum roll.
Not quite. I shout out, I don't think I'm going to name him, but there's an individual at Queen's Park who became a Christian because he had an angelic visitation, saw an angel. So at the end of the service, I went over and said to him, so tell me, did the angel that you saw have wings? And his answer was, actually, that's interesting. No, it didn't. So there you are. A little bit of empirical research on top of our biblical research. All our indicators are that angels don't have wings. Maybe they do in movies.
100% of angels surveyed.
Well, yeah, I mean,
members of the
one
church.
out of one. I think Brodie's other comment was about the lack of knees on angels. So I did.
I'll not tell you what my wife then said, following on from the saying that there was a lack of knees, but it was somewhere around. If they don't have knees, do they also have bottoms? Because your knees, it was a kind of like your ankle bones are connected to your knee bones, etc.
Well, I'm not able to confirm or deny on the basis of my brief research. So the angel's knees were not visible, but that doesn't mean it did or didn't have knees. So there we go.
Yeah, excellent. Maybe that's why certain members of our church always wear shorts, just to demonstrate that they have knees and therefore cannot be angelic visitors among us.
So it could be that we have a number of angels in the building. So we just have to check for who's wearing long trousers.
Check for knees. Check for. Anyway, right. Let's move this on to some slightly more sensible. Brodie, tell us. You missed a bit out. Basically, we skipped over the angel section. Give us a brief summary of how the angels are involved in chapter 14.
So there's three angels. The first angel, so I think the reason that people think angels with wings is it says, I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven. So how's he flying? But anyway, that's not the important point. The important point is that it says this angel has an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. And I think one of the things of, again, getting back to kind of like the politics of this, one of the things that we can miss is that as members, as citizens of heaven, as members of the kingdom of God, this is a transnational, trans-ethnic, it's every nation, tribe, language, and people. And so often the way of the dragon is to pit nations and tribes and languages and people against each other. It's interesting here what the gospel is. Now, hear me right on this. Of course, the gospel includes the death and resurrection of Jesus. That is central to the gospel as we preach it. But again, the word gospel is borrowed from the political lexicon. So we know that Rome would conquer a town or a city, and the commander would ride in on his white horse and say, "Dear people of New Cumnock, I have a gospel for you. A saviour has come. He is the Lord. His name is," and then he would say the name of the Caesar. And here, gospel is primarily being referred to, I think, as the one who is ruling and reigning. The gospel that he's proclaiming is God rules and reigns. The Lamb is the Saviour and is victorious. Fear God and give him glory. The hour of his judgment has come, is what the angel goes on to say. So it goes back to this big theme in Revelation about to whom are we giving allegiance? Who is it that we are following? Whose rule and reign are we under and obedient to? The second angel merely announces that Babylon the Great has fallen. Now, we haven't met Babylon the Great yet, so kind of like the reader's going, what? Who? What's this? That's to come. So we'll leave that for that's to come. We then come to a section which I've been really enjoying Jamie Davis's commentary, and Jamie says, we perhaps here in this section have the most disturbing images in the whole book of Revelation, because this is where we get the idea of eternal torment from. So it says that, those who drink of the wine of God's wrath poured unmixed into the cup of his anger will be tormented with fire and sulphur in the presence of holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb, and it goes on for ever and ever. What to make of that? As I alluded to on Sunday, of Revelation is full of people dying, and then you find them a couple of chapters later kind of like alive again. We know that the destiny of the dragon and the beasts is to be thrown down into the abyss. That is not where God wants anybody to go. God's will is that everybody would be saved, that all knees would bow. And so this is a warning rather than predictive, would be how I read it. It's like one of those books, I don't know whether, as a kid I can remember reading like a couple of books where at the end of the chapter you were given a, if you choose A, turn to page such and such, and if you choose B, turn, and so there was more than one
Choose
possible
your own adventure books.
Yeah, there was more than one possible ending. And I think, Shirley, when she was kind of like speaking the other week there, alluded to this as well, of Revelation says, if you do this, this is the ending that you end up with. But repent, because another ending is available and possible to you. Again, underlying all of this, because it is a difficult, this third angel bit is difficult. Underlying all of this is the character of who God is, and that God is love. I read a book in the summer where the writer played with the title of perhaps one of the most famous sermons preached within the past couple of 100 years. So Jonathan Edwards' famous sermon of Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God. And this guy titled his book Sinners in the Hands of a Loving God. And I think whatever this passage means, we know that God is love, that God is just, that God is good, but it's there as a warning. You're sitting on a railway track, there's a train coming, please move. So that for me is a brief summary of the three angels.
In some ways, that ties in with you having talked about distorted worship, because you said the dragon and the lamb can't be worshipped together. And I think that would also highlight certainly when you're talking about the third angel there, that ultimately you're making a choice, whether intentionally or unintentionally, or consciously or subconsciously, you are choosing who you're worshipping by how you're living. I wondered if for Christians there was a danger with distorted worship also, though. Iain, I don't know if that makes sense as a question.
Yeah, I think the fundamental thing is that we become like that which we worship. And where worship, I don't just mean singing, I mean where we attribute our values, that which we chase after or go after. We become like that. I mean, it's a bit like that, the law of sowing and reaping. That's where we engage our souls and hearts as a determinative effect on what we become. I think that's, and I think even the wrath versus worship. I think wrath, if you like, or judgment, is almost getting what you want. I think that's kind of how C.S. Lewis puts it, that to experience the judgment of God is simply to experience a life which pursues a track which is opposite and away from God. It's kind of the anti-worship or the worship of other things create something within us that is anti-life and destructive. So to choose the way against God, the way that is away from God, is to choose a life which steps out from under the life-giving, transformative power of God, and that's destructive. And Scripture calls that death. But also to worship God is to be formed in the image of God. And sometimes that, of course, we're really trying all the time, and it's the invitation of Revelation, is to worship God as he really is, not as we think he is. And so that's always something where we are really trying to track a bit more precisely what our true north is. We're trying to find a more accurate understanding of who God is and seeking to embody that more in our lives. So worship is critical to our formation. Worship is who we are, and the consequences of our worship can be life-giving or destructive. And of course, there's an element of that for us as Christians, that what we put in, what we go after, shapes and forms our lives.
So what's the check-in? What's the test that we should be, or the questions that we should be asking ourselves when we're thinking about our corporate worship, for example, when we're coming into church, and where our heads might be or otherwise, and what then our resulting worship might look like, or is that not important to do?
Well, I think worship, if you even just simply take a glance through Revelation, worship is Christ-centered. So the Lamb is all the glory. So, we need to keep asking ourselves, who is this for? Who's the actual audience here as we worship, whether personal or corporately? So it's Christ-centered. And I'd also suggest it's cruciform. So it's about the centrality of the cross, and we're going to get to that a little bit in the second half of this text. But it's about the cross and resurrection as the key agents of life and transformation. So and it is spirit, empowered. We're not just going through a particular process of transforming our minds by an educational trick. It's actually your encounter with the living God and the power of the Spirit. So, I think these are a few things. I think worship also has to have a corporate element to it. It can't just all be individualized. There has to be a sharing together and, hearing the voices in other people that call us to worship. And so I think these are a number of decks that we can apply.
Jackie, I think for me, one of the important things that the church has always done that helps us ask those questions is, as we gather around, now the church has called this different things. We call it communion or the Lord's Supper or the Eucharist. But that place, as Iain says, where we remember the cross, where we are Christ-focused, where we remember that we are participating in this when we bring our whole selves, our whole lives, because that's the big danger, isn't it, with worship, is especially when it's kind of like inverted commas Sunday worship, that we come to church on a Sunday morning for that, however long it is, or during those songs, we're one person, and then we leave the building and we're unchanged, or we and that was one of the big things, like the Old Testament prophets were speaking to the people of God about, is that your worship is in fact non-worship, because it's not affecting how you live. It's not changed your priorities. You're not obeying God's commands towards the widow and the poor and the orphan. And so how does worship play out? And that's a question that the church always has to keep answering. And it's something that at times we need a debate about to help us, or a conversation to help us discern of, well, what does this mean for our context and our situation? A good starting place is that our heart's desire? Is our heart's desire of, God, would my worship of you, would my worship of Jesus shape all aspects of my life? How I do business, how I study, how I interact with people, what I do when I'm on the football pitch or whatever. If that's our desire, then that's a good place to be, to start to work those things out, and to regularly and daily, kind of, as it were, bring our lives before God and say, here's my life, examine it. Show me where I need to come under you. Show me where I'm rebelling. Show me where there's sin in my life and disobedience.
I think what's interesting is that we've contrasted worship and war, or worship and destruction and so on. And when we're thinking about war and we're thinking about going into battle, then there's an expectation that you will lose, that you could lose your life, or that you could be injured, or so on, and that there is sacrifice involved in that. But in reality, for worship, the same is also true, in that there is sacrifice in it, and there is the laying down of yourself, and there is I was going to say training for it, and I don't suppose there really is training for it, but there is it is not a passive activity. It's not something that you just sit at the sidelines and sing whatever lines you want to. There is active engagement.
And I think, just if we were to look at, well, again, Revelation is asking us to be faithful disciples and to disentangle ourselves from the power of the dragon and the beast, and the effect of Babylon that we're going to get to. And I think there's a thing that our desires are part of that, and not all sin is decision that we make. We're not conscious of all our misdirected desires. So one of the things that worship does is to reorder our desires and challenge us, about the priorities of what we go after. Because all of life is calling us to worship, to place value upon things. For example, we live in a culture where economics is kind of the predominant test of success, certainly nationally. So we're in that environment all the time. So we have to be detoxed from that, and worship helps to detox from these things that are really pernicious and subtle that we just kind of pick up. So when we worship personally or corporately, we're reordering our desires. And in the power of the Spirit, we are being convicted of some of the things that are in it, our desires, which need to be put in the rightful place. Because not everything is sin, and not everything is conscious sin. So one of the things that worship does is to surface some of that stuff.
And I think there is training involved, Jackie. I mean, it's we call it discipleship, don't we?
Yeah.
But so there's that. But there is that challenge of, are we doing that well? Could we do that better for people that are new Christians? How we train our children and our young people and teach them. So wonderful. There's been a kind of like a bit of a spat. Is it a bit of a spat? I saw a thing on social media where somebody from a black majority church was saying, hey, in our church we don't have a problem with our young people kind of like engaging with worship. And it was this video of just, I mean, the church was rocking. You've got all these people, men and women, with their tambourines. Sorry, Richard, I know drummers hate tambourines because everybody's off time. These guys were on time. They had obviously been trained, but the wee kids, the wee tots, they were fully engaged with what was going on. Boys and girls, and they had all these moves to what they were doing. They were fully engaged, and I think it's a challenge for us in our contemporary culture, not just at QP but across the board, of how do we bring everybody with us, in worship? How do we communicate that this is not just, I think it was, you mentioned Dezo Reddy, who kind of like talked of his experience as a non-Christian going to church saying, is this Christian karaoke? You've got a big screen with all the words on it and we all sing along. How do we change worship from just being that to what Iain has described of this encountering God, reshaping of our desire, so that worship is formative? It is forming us as people both corporately and individually.
Well, we are 4/5 of the way through the show, so plenty of time left to deal with half of the rest of the passage. No problem at all. So we're on to the reaping section. Let's touch on the first bit, which a really interesting observation from the weekend, Brodie, that there was a sickle, so there was a reaping, but there was no threshing. It was effectively a pure harvest, because actually harvesting wheat and stuff is actually quite difficult. It's actually quite violent if you've ever seen it done as to what actually goes on in a combine harvester.
Yeah. I mean, it was somebody else had made that observation, so it wasn't me being super clever or reading the text incredibly well. Somebody else had made that observation. That doesn't mean that there's not a threshing that takes place, because elsewhere it talks about that. But it certainly, I think, emphasises the joy of the harvest. Mm-hmm. This is a joyful event, and for these Christians in these 7 churches who are under extreme pressure and lots of difficult things to deal with, to have that message of joy, I think, is part of what the book of Revelation is doing, of encouraging us. And it's not, again, C.S. Lewis was mentioned. C.S. Lewis talked about soft soap and bubbles as kind of like, something that had no substance to it. It's not soft soap and bubbles. It's not just kind of like, oh, let's just tell them something to make them happy. There's a reality, there's a deepness to this, that we are both included in this harvest, but are also participating in the harvesting.
And again, another one of these images in the sickle, that when normally we hear about it, we think about it in a completely opposite way to which it's spoken about in this passage. It just as you have disabused us of the idea of angels with wings, does a sickle actually appear somewhere else used in a violent, judgmental way, or is this actually where we do read about sickles, but we just incorporate them into modern culture in a different way, thinking about them as being handled by death or whatever?
Don't know, I would need to look.
Grab your concordance.
Yeah, I think that's right, Richard. I think we also need to remember that harvest for agricultural people is a super positive thing. That's when the fruit comes. It's not like farmer goes out to harvest his fields and think, oh, that's great, we're going to decimate everything, there'll be nothing left. That's not how a farmer thinks. Farmer thinks, this is great, the time to celebrate. This is when we actually see the fruit of our labour. And, without diving into any text, I would just suspect that in an agricultural society, much more agricultural society than ours, harvest is actually a positive thing. The day when you put the sickle in your hand to start, cutting things down and putting them in the harvest, it's a good day. It's a day of rejoicing. It's a day when the fruit is that you've waited for and that's been promised is when it all comes in. So the tone of this, I think, would naturally be much more positive than it is to us when we think of sickles as being, in the hands of the Grim Reaper.
Well, if anybody wants some work experience actually harvesting, then get in touch around about August next year and you can come and see it done on the farm as we harvest our grass. Right, the second reaping is really where it all kind of takes a bit of a steer in various directions. So I'm going to, because I'm editing, I'm going to go first. Because I had a read at this and I thought, I'd never noticed this before about this passage. So I'll dig into this. Tell me what you think. So when the first harvest is spoken about, okay, Son of Man having a golden crown in his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. So basically, Jesus has the sickle. Yeah?
Yep.
We're all agree with that. An angel then comes out and says to the person who's got the sickle, e.g. Jesus, go and reap. All makes perfect sense. Jesus then goes and reaps. He who sat in the cloud swung his sickle over the earth was reaped. So Jesus has got the sickle. Angel says, Jesus, go reap. Jesus goes reaps. Second one, another angel comes out of the temple who has a sharp sickle. So the angel has the sickle. Then another angel, the one who has power over the fire, came out, called with a loud voice to the angel who had the sickle, put in your sharp sickle, gather the clusters of the vine, the earth, because the grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle on the earth. So the second sickle is not swung by the Son of Man. It's swung by an angel. And in reading about this, all the other images of vine presses, it's the Son of Man that is in the vine press. So is this effectively a callback to the crucifixion? And it's got very little to do with people being judged, and it's all about this is the amount of blood that was shed by Jesus to cover your sins, that kind of thing. We'll let Jack deal with the horsey section shortly. Thoughts and comments?
I think my thoughts are probably that Brodie wants to kill you, but
No.
With a sickle.
Well,
I've hidden all the sickles.
I think we're of verse 20. So verses are helpful because it helps us kind of like know where each other are. And it says that this is done outside of the city.
Yes.
Really takes me to Hebrews 13:12, where it talks about Jesus being crucified outside the city. We get that by inference in the Gospels. The Gospels talk about Golgotha, or the place of the skull, and John says it's near the city. So if it's near the city, it's obviously outside. So this is, I think, talking about Christ's death and our participation in that we are included in Christ's death, and therefore we are included in the benefits of Christ's death.
So when it talks about the wrath of God being poured out, that's just reflective of all the passages talking about the wrath of God being poured out on Jesus at the crucifixion, as opposed to this being interpreted the way it has been, which is this is some sort of punishment to the rest of the world who are not part of the chosen, or the 144,000, the church, if you like.
It would be interesting to find some commentaries on this before Julia Ward Howe wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic.
Yes.
Okay. Fair enough. Iain?
Yeah, I mean, there are different ways in which this is interpreted. I think it is interpreted by some people as a manifestation of judgment and the grapes of wrath being tread on people. But I think I would veer towards Brodie's interpretation and your interpretation, just on the basis that, as verse 20 says, there's the wine press outside the city. I think is that nod to Golgotha and to the crucifixion. And I think we just need to be that, with all the symbolism of Revelation, we just need to be that little bit hesitant to try and identify everything as being something. So you don't harvest grapes with a sickle anyway, because
Yes.
grapes, you have to take them off a tree. So I think this is just in some way connecting the two harvests together and suggesting that they are one and the same, which is that it is through the poured out blood of Christ that the achievement of salvation takes place. Of course, I mean, there is the other allusion to that's maybe not as evident in the text, is that grapes speak of the wine that we drink, that speaks of the blood of Christ. So, if you're thinking about these church communities, hearing about grapes being pressed and blood flowing, then this is maybe a bit more speculative, but I can imagine that Christians reading this would think about, well, grapes being pressed, blood being poured out, that connects in my head to the blood of Christ that we remember when we gather to take bread and wine. So, in my view, this is about the extent and the scope of God's salvation, that it covers everything. It rises high as horses' bridles, and the point of that for me is that it's all sufficient. It's plenty. It's really deep. It's 1,600 stadia, which is a lot. And if it's 1,600 stadia at the height of a horse's bridle, then that is quite a volume. It's a sufficient volume for all humanity. I think that's simply what it's saying here.
I think the sickle thing's interesting because I think what you're harvesting here is not the grapes, you're harvesting the vine, which has the grapes attached to it, and that's a kind of allusion to, vine and branches and the whole church and all the rest of it. So you're seeing multiple things as everywhere else in Revelation. It would be just so much easier if you just told us one story at a time, John. It would have been easier, just little boxes, just little neat boxes, but we're being told like multiple things at a time.
I think as well, Richard, a couple of things of God's wrath is his justice. So, it's the justice of God is poured out here. And Iain's right of actually the about this the distance that this covers and the depth of it is saying it covers everybody everywhere. 1,600 stadia is 4 squared times 1,000. So you get 4 of the 4 corners of the earth amplified. It's 4 squared. 1,000 is kind of like in Revelation says it's a lot. It's big. It's universal. All of this covers everybody. It's deep enough. It's wide enough. So back to your Sunday school song of how high, how wide, how deep is God's love for us.
Right, I think we're heading into the finale, so let's get a cultural reference for this week before we get some final thoughts. Who wants to go first? I'll go first, actually, because we didn't touch on this at all, but there was a sad passing of an actor, Matthew Perry, who many of you will have appreciated from some of his work, although some of it, when you watch it back in, doesn't really play that well in the 21st century, but never mind. But I did read his biography some time ago, and I would highly recommend it. It's a bit sweary, to be fair. There's some details, and it probably has been slightly overquoted, the spiritual content, but that doesn't make it not worth reading. So if you wanted a book to distract you and to get alongside someone who really did have a story to tell, then I recommend his book, which sounds like it is from the book of Revelation because it's called Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. So there you go. There's mine. Who wants to go next?
I don't really have one. I mean, I've been enjoying running in the lovely autumnal weather when it's not been windy. And I've still been listening to the Chaos Dragon podcast series by Bible Project because it's awesome and highly recommended.
Yeah, a big shout out to the Bible Project videos. People are wanting to do a quick review of Revelation. There's some great videos on this. I think the one I do in Revelation 14 disagrees with us, Brodie, when it comes to what the grapes and wine represent. So that's
I've not watched it, but there we go.
No, I just every now and then check out my theology to see if it coheres with the Bible Project. So my cultural reference is actually one that I may well refer to on Sunday. So we've been watching on Netflix All the Light You Cannot See, which would be a great title for the book of Revelation. So it is a contrast between the Second World War, overtaking a community in the west of France, and the kind of enlightenment of young people's minds to a different way of behaving that comes from the airwaves through a radio broadcast. I won't say any more than that, but I think it just is a really good illustration of what's happening in the book of Revelation. So that's a title that we missed for the series.
Have you read the book, Iain?
I haven't read the book. No,
The book's great. Yeah.
So
We don't have Netflix currently, but it's one that I'd like to watch, having enjoyed the book so much.
Yeah.
Brodie?
Last night I was on YouTube listening to the wonderful Abraham Laboriel. So yeah, go and check him out. He's a bass player. I think he's Cuban. Yeah, he does some worship stuff. He's known for dancing while playing his bass. It's
Very good.
So there's a whole load of mix of different things. You'll find him playing worship songs, some golden oldies. He's exalted because he's quite an old man now, and things like that. Some other Don Moen kind of things, but also kind of like some jazzy stuff and some slap and some funk and whatnot. So there you go.
Good. Excellent. Right, let's bring it in for landing then. Jack, give us some final thoughts.
I just think it's impossible to have final thoughts anymore these days because there feels like there's no conclusion or ending to reach because everything is like up here
Still
in the
up
air.
here.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm afraid there's none from me.
No final thoughts. The end is not nigh quite yet. Iain?
yeah, I kind of with Jackie on this one. But I just think harvest is a good thing. Where God's
Yeah.
heading is good, and we should not fear the future. And we'll have more about that as we get towards the end of Revelation.
Good. Brodie, you preached it. Give us your final thought.
John's all about seeing and hearing. So he sees something and hears something. So we need to see and hear as well. So we need to see and hear that God is good, that He is for us. Great and amazing are your deeds, Lord God Almighty. And would that be our vision, and what we hear would do us a world of good.
Amen.
Excellent. Thank you all very much for joining us. Do leave us a review. If you've got anything to contribute to the show, then email office@qpbc.org. But it's goodbye from me and goodbye from all of them.
Goodbye.
Bye.